Welcome back everybody, my name is Tucker, and today's continuation of the What's Next series covers the Utah Jazz. After being bounced from the postseason by the Houston Rockets for the second straight season, this time in the first round rather than the second, there are some big questions about this Jazz team moving forward. They aren't necessarily as serious as the questions facing teams such as the Oklahoma City Thunder, for example, but there will be some big decisions being discussed within the organization over the next few months, and today we're going to be tackling some of the bigger ones. As you look at the roster, there are three main pieces they've built around since the departure of Gordon Hayward in free agency 2 years ago: Donovan Mitchell, Joe Ingles, and Rudy Gobert. Each of those players are under contract until the summer of 2021, so worst case scenario, they have 2 more seasons of having those 3 guys as the core of their team moving forward if they so choose. The issue is that enough talent and a good enough core to really compete in the West, and what should they do with the pieces around that core to potentially add to it, or at the very least raise its level of play? Beginning with the draft, the Jazz hold the 23rd pick, and the way I see it, they desperately need some help in the backcourt to try and take some of the scoring and playmaking responsibility away from Mitchell, which will hopefully help him become more efficient. In terms of guards, 2 prospects that could be on the board and worth taking a look at are Carson Edwards from Purdue and Nickeil Alexander-Walker from Virginia Tech. Starting with Edwards, he was outstanding as a scorer and playmaker for Purdue, and his speed and skill in the offensive end looks best suited for a spark plug role off the bench initially. But if he develops his skill set properly, his dynamic style of play could help him become a starting caliber guard in the NBA. The issue is that he isn't necessarily a true point guard, and neither is Mitchell, which makes for an interesting fit to say the least. And his lack of size will likely limit his offensive ceiling and cause him to have issues defensively. Having said that, this late in the first round, every prospect is going to have a good amount of flaws, but if developed properly, he could possibly develop into a Lou Williams caliber player down the road. On the other hand, Alexander Walker is the more intriguing player if he is still available, even though again the positional fit with Mitchell isn't great. A big positive for him over Edwards is his size at 6'6", which will make his transition to the NBA game easier. And with plenty of on and off ball playmaking ability to go with an at least average catch and shoot 3-point shot, he can really be slotted in anywhere and be a positive down the road. I also want to quickly mention a player that could help them in the front court in this range by providing spacing, a guy that I mentioned in the Thunder's video as well: Cameron Johnson, but I'm not going to go and repeat my evaluation of him once again, so if you missed that video, then be sure to check it out. Getting back quickly to the guard issue before moving on to the Jazz's free agency options, it's frustrating to me that this is still a problem for this team. Obviously, they did very well to select Mitchell where they did and empower him to be the player that he has become, but between investing in Ricky Rubio, Dante Exum, and Grayson Allen, I struggle to understand how they haven't made more progress towards finding a competent long-term backcourt option alongside Mitchell. Rubio has been fine, but his shooting struggles at times have been a real issue for this team, especially in the playoffs. And even though Exum fulfilling the potential of a former top 5 pick is still a possibility, he doesn't seem that much closer to realizing that potential now than when he was drafted. Meanwhile, Allen is the most recent attempt to solve their shot creation problem, and through just 1 season in the league, he does seem like he'll be a good shooter, but probably not much else. They have managed to make it work with Rubio and Ingles and others trying to help Mitchell and make sure he doesn't have to carry the load as much as he does, but it's time for them to find a real solution to this problem this offseason or the next, or risk being stuck in Western Conference mediocrity. Moving on now to free agency, the Jazz are currently projected for $92 million in payroll next season, which equates to right around $17 million in cap space, which seems like a lot for a team that has been as successful as they have the last 2 years since losing Hayward, but there are some variables here. Ricky Rubio will be a free agent, and even though he has his flaws, he was still a valuable member of the rotation that they'll either need to re-sign to a fair deal or find a replacement for. The other part of the equation is Derek Favors, who is technically under contract for next season after signing a 2-year deal last summer, but next year's money isn't guaranteed, so he could be bought out, which would open up even more cap space for the team. Now, on the surface, it kind of seems like this was a summer that the Jazz were preparing to be big players in free agency in, given the way they structured Favors' new deal and the expiring contract of Rubio, and it makes sense too. They have Gobert and Ingles under contract, and Mitchell is on his cheap rookie deal for the next 2 seasons. So in theory, they could open up a lot of cap space to sign a big free agent, keep the core of their team intact, and then go over the cap to re-sign those guys in 2 years, more specifically Mitchell. On paper, that idea sounds great, but Rubio and Favors aren't just throwaway pieces of this team. Rubio is still a good playmaker and defender even with his shooting flaws, and even though Favors isn't a great fit in the front court with Gobert and is more of a 5 than a 4, he is coming off of a more efficient season in lower minutes than what he posted the year before. Also, as many teams have learned before them, just having cap space isn't enough to sign free agents, and that is especially true for the Jazz. Just because they have an exciting young player in Mitchell and a Defensive Player of the Year candidate in Gobert doesn't mean that that is an enticing enough package to get big-name players to want to sign in Utah. That doesn't mean it won't happen, it just means that it isn't something that they can count on as much as some of the bigger market teams across the league. So they'll have to weigh the risk of letting go of Rubio and Favors to gain extra cap space against the chances that they'll actually use the extra cap space that they created. Having said that, some potential targets I could see them going after are Nikola Mirotic, Paul Millsap, and Patrick Beverley. Mirotic would provide them a ton of spacing at the 4 spot, and to a lesser extent, Millsap would as well. This is something that the Jazz have needed for a while and would finally move Favors to a full-time backup 5. They've gotten by the last few years by using players such as Jay Crowder at the 4 spot alongside Gobert for more spacing, but either Mirotic or Millsap would be better options. Mirotic will be looking for a raise from the $12 million or so that he is making this season, and that is something that the Jazz would be able to provide, in addition to offensive responsibility outside of just spacing the floor, given their general lack of options on that end. On the other hand, Millsap has a team option for next season that the Nuggets are likely to decline, given the amount that he would be getting paid. I'm not really sure the value Millsap has on the open market at the moment, because he went to Denver a few years ago as a versatile two-way 4-man, but has been injured so much of his time there and looks to be on the downhill part of his career. Fortunately for him, his three-point shooting percentages saw an increase this season with the Nuggets, even though it was on limited volume. So that should increase his value and the interest from other teams like Utah that are looking for the kind of versatility and spacing he can provide when healthy. The other option that I mentioned would be Patrick Beverley as a replacement for Ricky Rubio, who has 2 main advantages over the Jazz's current point guard: defensive ability and shooting. Beverley has long been known as a pesky and feisty defender, and his shooting numbers in LA far outpace what Rubio has been able to do in Utah, even when compared to the career year he had in that category last season. They would lose a good amount of playmaking with this switch, but pairing a player like Beverley with Mitchell that can defend and space the floor should only allow the young guard to become more efficient in his 3rd season. Ideally, in this situation, the Jazz would be able to find a point guard that would be able to provide them a ton of playmaking, but in this particular free agency class, those don't appear to be all that numerous. Maybe Goran Dragic if he opts out in Miami, or Terry Rozier in restricted free agency, but the better move here probably would be to try and find a young playmaker in the draft and then go with a more complementary point guard option like Beverley in free agency. In terms of money, like I always say, it's really difficult to project value this far away from free agency, but depending on how much they are valued across the league, the Jazz could potentially end up with both Beverley and Millsap in free agency. This could give them a 5-man lineup of Beverley, Mitchell, Ingles, Millsap, and Gobert, with Favors, Royce O'Neal, Kyle Korver, Grayson Allen, and Dante Exum off the bench. That doesn't necessarily solve their over-reliance on Mitchell as a playmaker issue, as I talked about before, but hopefully that's something they can find a bit of a solution for in the draft. In the end, none of the moves I talked about in this video will necessarily get the Jazz into the top tier of teams in the Western Conference. Even if they put together the 10-man rotation that I just mentioned, it would likely only put them 4 to 5 wins higher in the standings, but not that much closer to real championship contention. But unfortunately for this team, they're kind of stuck in the middle at the moment. They did a more than admirable job of rebuilding so quickly after Gordon Hayward left, and stealing Mitchell in the 2017 draft has given them enough star power to challenge for 45 to 50 wins in the West for the foreseeable future. That core of Mitchells, Ingles, and Gobert is really good, it just isn't great right now. This team just doesn't have enough top-tier perimeter talent to carry them on a long postseason run, no matter how good their defense is, and even that might be flawed come playoff time against teams like the Rockets. And it has to be frustrating to their fans too. Dante Exum is a former top 5 pick that they really needed to develop alongside Mitchell, and it just hasn't happened to this point. And beyond his potential growth and some cap space flexibility, there doesn't appear to be much upside to this team outside of Mitchell's growth into a potential All-NBA caliber player. This may just be the case of a team that got too good too quickly and didn't have the proper time to restock their team with high caliber talent before getting right back into the playoffs and picking in the 20s in the draft every single year. I give the front office a ton of credit for getting so much on-court value out of guys like Mitchell and Ingles and Gobert and O'Neal, but they almost did too good of a job of getting the most out of their players, which I know is really strange to say, and you never know. Maybe they'll continue to work their magic over the next few seasons and unearth some more gems before they have to extend Mitchell on a big contract and become a top-tier team in the West. But for me at the moment, it seems more likely that what they are right now is what they'll be for the next few seasons, barring some relatively big changes. And that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.